Welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Pod. Nick Whalen, Brandon Kravitz, we're here with you. It is Wednesday, March 6th. Brandon, busy night in the association last night. Thankfully, we don't have like a ton of pressing fantasy news. We had some injuries coming into the week. Trey Young last week, Scotty Barnes over the weekend, Devin Booker over the weekend. We saw the Suns go on the road to Denver and pull off a pretty impressive win in some ways, without Devin Booker. This is a game that, Phoenix ended up winning by 10 in overtime. But I was watching this one live, Brandon, and for a while, it's like, all right, this is just a weird performance by Denver. Shots aren't going down. You don't really see the Nuggets no-show like this very often. And then the Nuggets roared back and, outscored Phoenix over the final two quarters, 52-37, including holding the Suns to just 12 points in the fourth quarter. Yeah, the funny thing is Denver didn't play that well in the fourth quarter, at least offensively. Defensively, you got to give them a lot of credit. You also got to worry a little bit about what we saw from the Suns on offense. It completely broke down. And that says
12 points in the fourth quarter. That's almost hard to pull off with the talent they have.
It is. And, again, shots were going down. I think Durant at one point missed eight or nine shots in a row. So, sometimes those nights happen. But I thought Denver, especially looking back what happened in the overtime period, Durant basically just took over. I thought the Nuggets had a pretty good chance to just close this game out in the fourth, and they missed wide open shot after wide open shot. Michael Porter especially, had himself a decent night, but if just one of the four wide open threes that he missed in the fourth quarter goes down, Denver probably pulls this out. Nonetheless, I think this was a huge win, Brandon, for the Phoenix Suns because they'll be without Devin Booker for at least a few more games. This could be, the initial timetable, 7 to 10 days, could be more than that. But they're in a tough part of their schedule. They do have a very winnable game at home against Toronto tomorrow. After that, though, Boston, Cleveland, Boston. So I think banking this win in Denver, where at least going into that was like, all right, this is probably a loss. Good luck winning that one without Booker. Getting this one is huge because, Phoenix is still in that zone right now where they're going to have to fend off the Lakers. They're going to have to fend off the Kings. That win last night, pushed them above the play-in zone, at least for now.
Yeah, I think when you look at the Eastern Conference, it's not going to be as problematic for some of these teams that end up in the play-in tournament because the Bulls and the Hawks are probably going to be involved, so you should be able to overcome that hurdle. The Western Conference is a completely different story. You do not want any part of being in the play-in. This is like being in the Final Four of March Madness. You could end up in a one-off game against Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors. So you need to avoid that at all costs if you want to get yourself a playoff series. That 6th seed is huge in the Western Conference. You're right. That win was big. That was clearly not Denver's best game. Usually they're able to score more than 107 at home, especially. I thought Nikola Jokic, a little bit out of character yesterday, still put up great numbers, but 7 total turnovers yesterday. That's really unlike him. He's a much more efficient player than that.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, especially early on. I'm like, this is maybe the worst Jokic game I've seen all year. And he still gave you 25, 16, and 5, right? That's where Jokic is right now. He is very clearly, and he's been at this level for a while. But I think that is the mark of not even a superstar, but one of those next level, top 20, 25 guys ever, is that there are no truly bad games, right? Obviously LeBron got to that point. Durant got to that point. Curry got to that point at his peak, where you just don't have those nights where it's like, oh, you just went 2 for 9 and had 7 points. It's like, no, the bare minimum is still a pretty huge statistical game, and that's what we saw from Jokic last night. I thought he was more willing to shoot. He took 7 threes, right? That's not really something that he loves doing. Hit 4 of them. A couple of them were just ridiculous, high arcing shots. Had one just before the half. But the overarching point here is, it's going to be tough sledding in the short term for Phoenix without Devin Booker, but banking that win is massive. Dallas took another loss last night at home to the Pacers. I had that one going on the far left TV, Brandon. We were watching.
That was a far left TV game. I don't know. That one felt like a center TV game. To
my live-in roommate / wife was watching a documentary on the 2000s on the far right TV, which was really interesting. Actually, I love stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's very
that
thorough.
Has center TV potential too.
Yeah. So Suns Nuggets got the center, and then we were switching between League Pass games on the far left. This was, and I know this happens in a lot of Pacers and Mavs games. This was comically poor defense by both teams. Comically poor. I at one point, Daniel Gafford had 3 straight dunks on just wide open passes from Luka Doncic. It's not a coincidence that Daniel Gafford was 7 for 7 from the field last night because every single one of them was a dunk or a layup. Interesting on Gafford, I do want to note because we got questions on him on Monday. He had been playing. He had some games where he's playing like 7 minutes, 8 minutes. He did play 21 off the bench last night. Now, Lively got in a little bit of foul trouble. They only played him 16 minutes. Kleba had 3 fouls as well. So I don't know that we're just all of a sudden back in on Gafford, but he had 16, 10, and 3. So something to monitor because a ton of people dropped Daniel Gafford over the weekend.
And if I remember correctly, last week we told you not to panic on this, that it was going to be an ebb and flow situation when it came to the bigs with the Dallas Mavericks. And look at Derek Lively, 16 minutes played. Obviously was not all that effective. He scored 0 points, but I think Miles Turner had 20-something by halftime. He finished with 20 points, so I'm not exactly sure what happened there because he went off. I think all of that production was in the first half. This was the game that I turned on after, obviously, if you listen to this podcast weekly, you figure this out at this point, that I work with the Orlando Magic, and so I had Magic Hornets on last night, but the moment that game ended, it was over to this one, and I actually live bet the under because they had hiked it up to 266.5, and I'm like, there's no way. I understand that there was no defense being played, laughable, but at some point somebody is going to crater offensively, and you just have to sort of cross your fingers. And well, it did happen. Dallas scored 18 points in the third quarter. That was the only reason that I hit that live bet. But that first half, they were both into the 70s by the halftime break, so it did seem like they were well on their way to another Pacers 300-point total game.
I'm worried about Dallas defensively. Coming out of the All-Star break, I was all over this team. They had won 6 in a row going into the break. I love the additions. I mean, I'm telling you, man, go back and watch the fourth quarter. Like, this was alarming, really alarming. And the Pacers were doing a lot of this with their bench unit. I mean, they went deep into the fourth with, Obi Toppin and, TJ McConnell. Like, this was not, Halliburton's numbers look great. This wasn't like a Halliburton takeover game. Mathurin played well. Ben Shepherd played well. Like, this was, for the most part, a lot of reserves for Indiana just dicing up this Dallas defense over and over. And I was, kind of poking around Mavs Twitter last night. There was, somebody who's pretty plugged in who said he's hearing some Mike Budenholzer rumors as a potential coach for next season, which would, I believe, be the second time that he has ousted Jason Kidd from a job. So, we'll see. Obviously, a rumor at this point. But, the Mavs, they're in the play-in zone right now. They're the 8th seed right now in the Western Conference. And, there's now a pretty huge gulf, Brandon, between the Lakers, the Mavs, the Warriors, and then, teams like Utah and Houston. They're 5 games back. We pretty much know who the top 10 teams are going to be in the West. And like you said earlier, if I'm Sacramento, if I'm Dallas, could be Phoenix, could be New Orleans in that 7 and 8 spot. I know the Lakers and the Warriors have not been consistent whatsoever. I know they've proven they can lose to just about anybody on any given night. I still don't want to be in a win or go home scenario against LeBron James or against Steph Curry.
No, thank you. No part of that. Yeah, we know who the teams are going to be. We have no idea what the seeding will be because even the top spot held by Minnesota, they're only 1 game up on the 3 seed, the Denver Nuggets. They're 3 games up on the LA Clippers, who, for the most part, outside of their last game, have been playing some really good basketball. So we really have no idea how this thing is going to shake out. The last month of this season is going to be huge in terms of seeding, and I think that is a big part of this entire equation. It does seem like, just based on where we are, the 2 teams at the bottom of that top 10, the Lakers and the Warriors are going to have to play their way in, but it is everybody else that has to scratch and claw their way out of having to play against Steph Curry or LeBron James in a win or go home situation. It really is fascinating, and tip of the cap to Adam Silver and the NBA, because what they have set up is a far more interesting postseason because of possibilities like this that are on the horizon.
All right, let's hit a few more news items from last night. Keep stacking up questions in the chat, guys. We will hit those over the second half of the pod, as we always do. You guys always give us great questions. We love that interaction, so keep throwing those in the chat. We got to talk about Alperen Sengun. And I guess in conjunction with him, Victor Wembanyama. I mean, my goodness, man, this was another game I was flipping between on League Pass. I would argue the best game of Sengun's career, certainly his best game of the season, best game of late. 45 points, 16 boards, 5 steals, 3 assists. He actually had 6 steals at one point. There was a stat correction. As someone who now rosters Sengun in the RotoWire Stake League, I was keeping a close eye on that. So somebody at the NBA stats department is going to have to answer for why he lost one of those steals. Doing that against Wembanyama, man. I mean, you could argue Wembanyama is in that inner circle of, best defenders overall, certainly best interior defenders in the NBA. Alex Barutha actually gave out Wembanyama to block at least 7 shots, which was 6-1. 6-1.
What?
That is a crazy number. I told him on the show, I'm like, yeah, I could see him doing it, but like, you got to give me better than 6-1 for a guy to get to 7 blocks. And he had 3 blocks in the first 10 minutes. Houston gets blocked more than any team in the NBA if you look into some of the metrics. So it was not a great game for Wembanyama. He only had 10 points, 11 boards, 7 blocks, which now goes down as like an average game for him. His blocks and steals props every night are now 5.5, which is ridiculous. Like no one else is even in that range.
Yeah, I was gonna give that one out. The NBA prop plays that I give out on RotoWire social media accounts every day. That was one of the. I usually end up with like 4 picks that I really like, and then I got to whittle it down to 2 just for the video purposes. Yeah. And that was one that was on the chopping block. And I looked back at the end of the night, just kicking myself because he did it, and it was exactly that. It was the steals plus blocks stat that was set at 5.5, and he did it all. He didn't need a single steal. Didn't get one. Still hit the over on that. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's unreal, man. Every with each passing day, I know we've talked a lot about like, is he going number 1 next year? Like, I'm taking him number 1. I'm taking him number 1. I don't care. I know, you can argue there's a little more safety with Jokic. Even I think SGA is now like in that discussion at least. There still might be people who go back to Embiid if you trust the health. In some formats, maybe Giannis makes sense. I get that, but man, I just don't know that anybody else can match that kind of upside. Like 2 seasons ago, when Jokic was like the runaway best player in fantasy basketball, where it was like almost an unfair advantage to have him. Jokic, I think it's kind of come back to the pack a little bit, or maybe more accurately, the pack has caught up to him because of some of the crazy counting stats that guys like Luka and SGA are putting up. But I think in a best case scenario, Wembanyama, it returns number 1 pick value and maybe jumps like a full tier ahead of that group, right? Like if he's given you, it's totally possible. Like you see a lot of great players make that year 2 leap, right? Where like, LeBron's always the example I throw out, went from like 20 points a game as a rookie to like 27 his second year. Like obviously Victor Wembanyama could do that, especially if they jack up his minutes into the 35, 36 range where he should be. I mean, he could be 25, 13, 4 or 5 assists, 2 to 2.5 steals. I don't know. And like 4.5 blocks. I mean, nobody's matching that.
Yeah, he's got to get there as far as consistent scoring, but the thing he's giving you that those other guys at the top are not are those counting stats on the defensive side. And he is so big and lanky and athletic. He's basically a lock for a couple of blocks a game. You can already bake that in to your score. I do think that we are in an era of fantasy basketball where there just isn't a clear-cut one. You have you're kind of in a zone where if you have a top 5 pick next year, you're just kind of good no matter who you end up with, because they all do different things exceedingly well. Nobody's giving you across the board stats, points, rebounds, assists like Nikola Jokic. Nobody right now, especially playing guard, is giving you the efficiency and some defensive stats like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And just the monster scoring numbers that you get from Giannis on top of the other things that he does really well. And he does a lot of it around the basket, which means his percentages are buoyed as well. But nobody's blocking shots in that group like Victor Wembanyama. So yeah, I feel like it's a little Baskin-Robbins like. Just pick your flavor, because you're going to end up with something that nobody else in the league is able to produce.
I think I would argue in a category league, though, that Wembanyama like lapping the field in blocks is more valuable, because if he stays healthy, he's basically guaranteeing you, maybe you don't win the category depending on what you do with the rest of your roster, but like at worst, you're going to be like top 5 in blocks in your league, right? Like there's just no way if he stays healthy that, if he's giving you 4.5 blocks per game, that you're not up there. Like I'm looking at the last 30 days. We have a great tool on RotoWire where you can look at, each player's value over a given time frame. You can select which categories you want. And then you can look at, what we call a Z score for each category. His Z score in blocks is 6.1 right now, which is incredibly high, like really good. In another category would be like 1.5 or 2. he's twice as valuable as the next most valuable player in shot blocking, which is Anthony Davis, who's at like 3.1. And Davis is averaging 2.8 blocks per game in the span that I'm looking at, last 12 games, which is exceptional. And Victor Wembanyama is twice as good. So, if you look at the last 30 days, he's the best fantasy player in the NBA in 8 category leagues. There's just no real weakness right now. Like, he's giving you 1.8 steals. Obviously, we talked about the blocks. I think he could be a 5-6 assists per game guy next year. Field goal percentage is good, despite, being a little bit shaky as a shooter. And the free throws. That was the big question mark with Wembanyama was, the free throw percentage has been decent overseas. We'll see how that translates. 82% for a 7'5" rookie is fantastic. I mean, it's better than Luka Doncic. It's better than Anthony Davis. It's basically the same as Nikola Jokic. SGA is actually down in the low 80s this year. That was a big thing for him in years past. He was closer to 90. I'm taking him number one. That's all I'm saying.
The beauty of it is that one thing that you just sort of threw in there, the big question mark was the free throw shooting. The big question mark, too, that we aren't even talking about is health. Is this guy going to be able to stay on the floor? And you're right in not bringing that up as a question, because it kind of feels like it's already been answered. It doesn't seem like that is an issue. We've seen this guy take hard falls this year. We've seen his minutes increase over the course of the season. He plays a style of basketball that, for his size, he's a little bit finesse, but it works for his game because he's got those finesse sort of abilities. He's unbelievable, and I'd have no problem. I'm certainly not laughing anybody out of the room if they draft Wembanyama first overall. I'm still not there yet, but I'm not far away from it, and certainly have no issue with anybody that decides they want to go in that direction. We're drafting players later in the draft that can do one thing that Victor Wembanyama does across the board. If you had a guy that blocked shots like Wembanyama, you're targeting him. He's Walker Kessler, he's Walker Kessler plus Shea plus Giannis plus Doncic, and he's incredible, and you're certainly not going to regret it if you end up taking him at the top of the draft.
Yeah, last thing I'll say on this is you can look at the overall Z-score. His is 1.42 on our site, and you can find this on the ratings page on rotowire.com. The implication is that what he's given you over the last 30 days is basically the same value as, like, if you combined like the 18th and the 19th best fantasy player. Like, he's given you 2 top 20 players, and the weight, it's outsized weighting in terms of what he gives you in blocks. So, I'm not saying like the counting stats equal Kyrie plus Kawhi, like that's a little ridiculous, but the weighted value that he gives you in blocks is that significant. So Victor Wembanyama, extremely good, living up to the hype. No question about that. We got to talk Jakob Poeltl, Brandon, as the hits keep coming for Toronto. This was an ugly game. One of my best bets yesterday was Kelly Olynyk over 16.5 points plus assists. He did get there. I thought this one was dead because the Raptors were down 40 early in the third quarter, and I thought it was Jonte Porter time, and we were cooked. For some reason, Olynyk came back into the game, padded the stats a little bit, finished with 22 rebounds plus assists. That prop is now hit in 9 of 10 games when he's played at least 25 minutes this season. But Toronto looked awful, man. I mean, they went, I think, 3 or 4 minutes in the second quarter without a bucket. They just can't really create anything right now, even with Quickly and Barrett out there. I don't think we see Scotty Barnes again this season, to be honest, coming back from a broken hand. And, now we see, Poeltl was questionable to start the week. He didn't play last night. And then, during the game last night, we got news that he's undergoing surgery to repair a torn ligament in his finger. So I think he's now in Scotty Barnes territory where medically, timetable-wise, he could be back. What's the point? I think Toronto is totally fine just sliding their way down and trying to hold on to their first-round pick.
This is why I have a really hard time when you get into March. I'm a big NBA bettor night to night.
Yeah.
I'm usually on, up to 2 games on any given night in the league. And this time of year, I take nights off regularly because I just can't trust anybody. Half the teams in the league, you have no idea what their motives are. Some of them, you feel like you're getting value, double-digit points in your direction, but a game like last night is a good example of that. It just doesn't really matter. There's some of these teams are just not fielding real basketball teams at this point of the year, and you just don't know what the motivation level is like for these guys at this point. What do you think the Raptors locker room is like when they wrap up for the night and they get ready to work the next day? You know, this is not a high morale situation at this point. This is a tough one to trust, fantasy wise too.
Justin Freeman Liberty, who they just picked up, I think got a 2-way deal last week, was playing like 2 minutes into the third quarter. That's where we're at right now. You know, I had a little bit of interest in like Ochai Agbaji, who I thought would be the guy to kind of step in minutes wise for Scotty Barnes. He did start last night, gave you 3 points in 16 minutes. There might just not be a whole lot there. I think, you know, they're not going to lose by 41 or whatever it was, 43, like they did last night every night. But it's going to be ugly. It's going to be really ugly. And, you know, I think Barrett and Quickly, like you're still going to get your counting stats there. But, you know, this team really struggles shooting the ball too. I mean, Grady Dick was awful last night. I'm still not out on him. You know, I think in deeper leagues, if you need threes, you know, he's somebody you can at least look at. The minutes are going to be there. But you know, he was 1 of 7 from the field, 0 of 5 from 3. At one point just got straight up like ripped by Zion for a dunk on the other end. Like he just didn't really look ready or confident. And again, this team, you know, they owe a top 6 pick or protected pick in the draft. So I think they kind of made that calculation, and the injuries to Poeltl and Barnes, I think, made that decision as far as what direction their season is going a little bit easier. So I think they're now in, all right, let's try to chase down Memphis to get the 6th worst lottery odds, and maybe we can hold on to that pick. Are you saying that Toronto maybe has to go into that bucket of like, I don't know if I'm touching this team, and if I am, I'm fading them?
Yeah, but that's the thing is I don't even feel comfortable fading teams like this. I think that would be the logical thought as well. If you never want to bet on them, then I guess you want to bet against them. I just can't touch it because the odds makers have caught up in terms of the numbers they're putting onto these games, where I feel like when you look at the spread, all of the values on the bad team, and you're sort of a sucker if you take the favorite. But I can't get a read for it. You know, obviously you're going to hit one of the two directions hits every single night, you know, unless there's a push. But I don't feel like I have a good read for it where I can. The NBA is very much ride the waves of momentum positively or negatively over the course of a couple of weeks. And I just can't get a feel for, are they going to be in a game tonight? Are they not going to care at all? Who are they going to play? Guys like Grady Dick that might turn out to be a good NBA player. This guy's still figuring it out. So in a betting perspective, I look at certain teams. When I cross a team off the board, I cross them off my board in both directions, both betting on them and betting against them. You know, as for Grady Dick, I wouldn't abort ship just because he had a bad night. That was as bad as it's going to be for the Toronto Raptors. He's still knocking down threes at a pretty good rate. If you were to take that 0 of 5 out of the equation from last night. So this is a guy that's still going to get his. There's no reason for them not to give him minutes at this point with them heading clearly in a south direction.
So you mentioned you're doing the PrizePicks videos for us each night. Those have been fantastic. Go check those out on the RotoWire NBA Twitter account. You can find them on the RotoWire account as well. You know, Brandon's been throwing out 2 picks per night there. I love playing on PrizePicks. That's been my dominant site as well. What are you liking for tonight?
So I'm looking the way of this is a bounce back opportunity for both of these players. Paolo Banchero last night, I had my eye on his points plus assists prop. Didn't end up playing it, and glad I didn't. He didn't hit it. He did go over on points, but just wasn't there. It was 27.5 set last night against Charlotte. It's the same exact number tonight. Now, here's the thing. As bad as the Hornets are, I'm not sure that they are as much of a mess, at least defensively, as the Washington Wizards are. So I'm going to hop on that prop tonight. 100 points, 120 points or more in each of their last 4 games for the Wizards. They've been giving up a ton of points, and I think Paolo is ripe to feast tonight. Over 27.5 points plus assists. It's kind of been his brand over the last month plus. When he plays against teams that are sub 500, he tends to go off. No shocker there. And then I'm pairing that with a legend. I don't usually go after the GOATs because all of those numbers are always inflated. But Steph Curry coming off of an 0 of 9 3-point shooting performance, I think he's bouncing back in a big way tonight. So I'm taking his over at 5.5 threes made Just an absolute embarrassment the last time they took the floor. I think he'll be out for some vengeance.
5.5. Ooh, what a number. Golden State home for the Milwaukee Bucks tonight. We'll see if Giannis is out there, by the way. I know he's currently questionable. If you're watching this, you probably saw the video of Giannis earlier this week warming up, and I'm a little concerned. I would put my concern level at like 6 out of 10. I think the Bucks would be wise to hold him out for a few games. Obviously, you don't want this to be something that recurs. The Bucks had said that he'd been dealing with a little bit of Achilles soreness over the last few weeks, and was able to manage it. Obviously, didn't play the other night. Excuse me, against the Clippers. I don't know that Milwaukee's going to be able to sustain beating good teams without Giannis. Even tonight on the road in Golden State, if he doesn't play, that becomes a pretty dicey situation. But obviously, you got to prioritize keeping him healthy for the playoffs. They're sitting in the 2 spot right now in the East. Let's go to the chat. We got some good questions here. We'll start hitting some of these. Our guy Free Key says, is bench Poole actually good? I have him sitting on waivers in his league. He might be. It's worked out better than we thought, right? I mean, I think you can argue he's had his best 8-game stretch of the season. Since the first game before the All-Star break when he had 19 and a loss to the Pelicans. During that span, 23 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.5 steals. Taking 9 threes a game, hitting 3.8 at 40%, shooting 44, 41, 89 from the field. He's got 3 30-point games in that span. I've stayed away from Jordan Poole. I have not rostered him on a single team all season. Wasn't necessarily by choice. He was just going a little too high for me in drafts and a little too expensive in auctions. Most of the leagues I play in are a little deeper, so he hasn't been dropped. I will say, if he were available in our 16-team RotoWire Stake League, where I desperately need another guard, I would pick him up. I think the bigger question is, if you're in a 10-teamer or a 12-teamer, are you going back to the well on Jordan Poole? Because, if he's been sitting there for the last 2 weeks, you probably wish he was on your roster.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with that. When you're putting up the numbers, he scored 30-plus in 2 of his last 3 of his last 5. I think only the most stubborn person would tell you they still want no part of Jordan Poole. I was saying that for months, but yeah, he has definitely turned it around. Bench Poole has become a completely different player. And then ironically enough, the guy that he would have been the direct replacement for in Golden State also now coming off of the bench in Klay Thompson. And it seems like both are thriving in this role. So I don't know what kind of magic pixie dust they're sprinkling on these benches these days, but it seems to be working for these knockdown shooters.
Christian Rogers says, good morning, fellas. Morning, Christian. Thanks for tuning in. Should I drop Paul Reed and pick up Dean Wade? Wade went crazy last night, and looks like Evan Mobley might be out for a while after injuring his ankle. Really good question here. Yeah, Mobley, I don't know if this was carryover from the other night when, he got crossed into oblivion and ended up falling down. But they said that he left the arena on crutches. So I would expect at least a game or 2 for Evan Mobley. If you locked him into a weekly league lineup, probably taking the L the rest of this week. The Cavs are in Atlanta tonight. They play Minnesota Friday, and then they have a home game against Brooklyn on Sunday. So, hopefully he gets back for one of those games, but certainly could be a situation where he's missing time. So the question basically is Paul Reed versus Wade. And, Dean Wade had the best quarter of his entire career last night. Scored 23, had 6 threes, basically did everything for the Cavs in the fourth, as they rallied back to beat the Boston Celtics. 20 of those 23 points came in the fourth. I think I would still lean Paul Reed. I know it's appealing now, especially with Mobley projected to miss time, but the larger sample strongly suggests that that's not the guy that Dean Wade is. And we actually, obviously Mobley missed time in December and January. So we could go back and look, all right, what happened during that span? Dean Wade, 22 starts in a row from December 8th through January 26th, 7.5 points, 4.8 rebounds, 1 steal, 2 made threes a game. So he's still giving you that. My answer would be, it depends how badly you need 3-pointers specifically, because I think that would be the big advantage that Wade has over Paul Reed. Now, Paul Reed he's come off the bench now in 3 straight games for Philly. They seem to have soured on him a little bit, but I still think he's going to give you a slightly higher baseline night to night, even if Mobley, ends up missing 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm very put off by the idea of Mo Bamba, who has not proven to be a good NBA player, starting over Paul Reed. That's not a great sign of where you are in your NBA career. But So I struggle to give him my endorsement here, but this is not who Dean Wade is. This is what Dean Wade is capable of. He certainly can knock down threes, but he's got to get that sort of a volume in order to put up numbers like that. And that's just not typically the case. So I think this is more of a one-off performance. Maybe he'll do it one or two more times, but Paul Reed would be the more consistent, reliable option, even if Philadelphia wishes they had anybody else.
Yeah, I would, if you can, I would try to wait, at one or two more games. I would like to see, like, is this minutes thing for Paul Reed a trend? They played a close game against Phoenix last night, against Brooklyn last night, and he still only played 19 minutes. He wasn't in foul trouble. So, like, if all of a sudden he comes out and plays like 14 minutes off the bench next game, then you're in a spot where maybe Dean Wade makes more sense. But I do still think Reed's going to give you a slightly higher floor. Christopher says, I am beyond annoyed. Not with you guys. Whew, thankfully.
Good. That's
I love the show, been here all year, but the playoffs start and I lose Barnes, Booker, Giannis, Jaren Jackson, and Desmond Bane. See you next year. So there's no question here, but we will. I think we can offer our condolences. My goodness.
Yeah, Christopher, we will be thinking of you. Our thoughts are with you and your fantasy family. Better luck next year. Hey, we started talking about next year's draft already. It's never too early to get a ranking out there. So, and rotowire.com, great source for all of that information.
Jaren Jackson, by the way, questionable tonight against the Sixers. So he hasn't been shut down yet, but he's missed 3 in a row. I think we kind of saw this coming. I think he plays again the rest of the year. I don't think this is like an official shutdown, but the reason that I flipped him for Sengun last week was, like, even if Jaren Jackson ends up being the better player per game, I'm banking on Sengun playing 18 to 22 more games the rest of the year, and I'm banking on Jaren Jackson playing 10 to 12 more games. And obviously you're going to get more value out of the guy who's playing that many more games. So the shutdown's coming, I think, for Jaren Jackson. So it's tough to say, go move off of him right now. You probably had to do that around the All-Star break, because anybody who's paying attention in your league is going to charge you a pretty steep discount on him. But it is something I would consider. Alex and I talked about that on Monday. What's a realistic trade? Like, somebody said, that somebody offered him Towns for Jaren Jackson. Yes, do that. If somebody's willing to give you someone like Towns, just pull the trigger. Don't even think about it.
Yeah.
But you're gonna have to aim lower, and with the amount of injuries that you have, Christopher, it's going to be tough, right? I mean, Barnes probably isn't coming back. Who knows on Bane? Giannis and Jaren Jackson, they probably don't miss that much time. You'll get Booker back, but it may be too little too late for you. But if you could deal Jaren Jackson for somebody who you just think is going to play the rest of the season, it's probably going to be a winning proposition for you.
You know what it sounds like? It sounds like Nick is telling you, don't give up. Never give up. Never surrender. You're not out of it yet.
Never, ever, ever. Matt Carmody says, what's up from Ireland, guys? Hello, Matt. Do you think the Bucks could beat the Celtics come playoffs? Could they? Yes. Yes, they could. Would I pick them to do so? No, I would not, because the way that the Bucks aren't catching Boston for the number 1 seed. It's going to go through Boston. You're going to play the first 2 there. You're playing a game 7 in Boston if it gets that far. The Celtics basically have every box checked over Milwaukee other than best player in the series, right? I think they have more depth. I think they're the better shooting team. I don't know if I would say they're better coach. To me, maybe that's a wash.
I was going to say, I think that actually this is where you can finally give Doc Rivers an edge.
Sure.
That's my biggest question mark with the Boston Celtics, because in the regular season, it doesn't matter that much, but by the time you get to the playoffs, especially as you get deeper into the playoffs, it matters a ton. The type of adjustments that you make, rotations, timeouts, like every little detail matters so much. And that's where coaching comes into play, elite coaching. We have not seen that Joe Mazzulla is an elite NBA coach yet. He was schooled by Eric Spoelstra. Eric Spoelstra might be in a different class, but Doc Rivers has been doing this thing for a long, long time. So I would give the Bucks the slight edge there. You can never count out Giannis just going absolutely crazy. Damian Lillard, we'll see what kind of impact he has in the playoffs. By the time you get to that series, you might have a completely different view of what could be accomplished. But with all of that said, I don't think anybody's beating Boston this year, East or West. I think Boston, they just look like they're head and shoulders above everybody else in the NBA right now, top to bottom.
Yeah, I think it would be a competitive series. Like, I don't think Boston sweeps the Bucks or beats them in 5 even. I think it could be a 6 or 7 game series, but
the Celtics have historically defended Giannis pretty well. You know, you're asking a lot of Porzingis, who's never really been in that spot, and then, you know, an aging Al Horford, who throughout his career has defended Giannis well, but is a different player now than he was even 2 years ago. So you can't rule it out. I mean, it would have to be a series where Giannis is probably giving you 35 a night, and Lillard's giving you 30 a night. Like, those two kind of have to do it for Milwaukee, because even the other night against the Clippers, when Giannis is out, like Malik Beasley has his worst game of the year. It's like those Boston all of their role players to me have a higher floor. They have more options. Their fourth best player is head and shoulders above Milwaukee's fourth best player. And then, of course, the elephant in the room is Chris Middleton and his health. Like, if Middleton is locked in and looks like 2018 Chris Middleton, then yeah, I mean, it's totally possible that Milwaukee could win that series. But I think a lot of things would have to break Milwaukee's way for that to happen. I would say the Celtics win that series 7 to 8 out of 10 times, at least right now. But maybe we'll feel differently. I mean, the Bucks have seemingly turned somewhat of a corner.
And Boston's going to have home court advantage at this point. They've pretty much unofficially locked that up. They're 29-3 at home this year. They've been a lights out home team in the playoffs the past couple of seasons. This team is ripe to break through and finally win an NBA championship. You have to win a game in Boston, and I'm not sure that any of these teams are really going to be able to do that.
Yeah. Another question from Matt. He says, I'm down Mobley, Ayton, and Okongwu at center. What order would you rank the following players as potential additions? Paul Reed, Duop Reath, and Andre Drummond. This is a head-to-head Yahoo points league. Yeah, tough situation there. Obviously you're specifically looking for one position here with three guys injured at center. DeAndre Ayton likely out again tonight against OKC. That would be his fourth straight absence. So I still don't know that I would drop Ayton. Like, I don't see him necessarily as a glaring shutdown candidate. I think they kind of want to get their investment on him. Duop Reath has played well. He started the last 3 games. He had 26 points the other night against Minnesota in a really tough matchup at 5 3-pointers. He's not a high volume rebounder. The shot blocking's been nice. He's got 6 blocks over the last 3 games. Alex and I talked about, Reath versus Jabari Walker the other day. And I think we like Walker a little bit more. But if Reath is going to be playing 35 minutes a night, obviously that is something you have to consider. I still like Andre Drummond, man. I have too many centers on some of my teams where I couldn't even get Drummond in my lineup this week. I also missed out on his 26 rebound game the other night. You kind of have to play the matchups with him. Like, he got in foul trouble against Sacramento, didn't really do much. In a points league, I think Drummond is probably going to give you the highest floor. And you never know. I mean, I don't think the Bulls are going to be shutting anybody down because they're dead set on getting that 10 seed in the East. As of right now, assuming Ayton is coming back at some point in the next week, I would go Drummond, Reath, Reed.
Yeah, that's exactly how I was going to rank it. Just rank it backwards in terms of the question. The rebounding, not replaceable in terms of what Andre Drummond can bring you. Duop Reath has been a really exciting player this time of year, and I'm almost completely out on Paul Reed. By the way, the Sixers almost out on Paul Reed too, apparently.
Yeah. Coincidentally, Paul asked us, maybe this is Paul Reed himself, which is more likely to happen? Portland sitting Simons toward the end of the season or Detroit sitting Cunningham? Great question here.
Wow.
I would say Simons.
It has to be Simons.
Detroit
can't keep doing this. They cannot keep doing this. Of course, hindsight's a crystal clear 2020. I think if Detroit could have it to do over again, they wouldn't punt on last season. It has set them back so far. This team should be a couple of steps ahead of other rebuilding teams in the NBA. They got Cade Cunningham in the 2020 draft. That's a superstar type of player that they should have been developing last year. I don't think he was shut down all year because he was hurt. I think he was shut down all year because they wanted Victor Wembanyama. They didn't get him. They stunted his growth. They stunted the team's growth. And now they're having to make up for it. This isn't the draft where you need to have the top pick in order to get a good player. I'm not sure there's even a great one to be had in the top 5. So I think they would be so foolish to shut him down. They have to get out of that business.
Well, I think what breaks the tie for me, and again, I think it's relatively unlikely that both get shut down, but I would say Simons. Detroit is essentially locked into a bottom 4
record, and that's what matters as far as lottery odds go. Like, there's no Wembanyama in this draft, but you still want to be picking as high as you can. Like, I think that matters.
Valuable.
You still want your choice. Portland, meanwhile, has 17 wins, so they have the 5th worst record. They're only 2 games, quote unquote, ahead of the Charlotte Hornets. So I think there's more motivation for Portland draft pick wise than there is for Detroit, because Detroit, they've won 9 games with Cade Cunningham this year. And if Portland really wants to make that push in the last 2 weeks to try to, fall below Charlotte and get those smooth lottery odds and have a chance at the number 1 pick, then I think sitting Simons could make some sense. So that's where I would go there. Who has the higher rest of season value, Scoot or Keyonte George? Good question. These are 2 players that have been, tethered at the hip in fantasy for a lot of the season. Keyonte George, kind of had a bad game on Monday, but he left that game early with an illness. He was sick coming in, so you kind of wipe that away. We'll see if he plays tonight. He's questionable. Scoot, meanwhile, has been injured for a while now. Has not really been able to stay healthy consistently. Missed time early on. He's going to miss his 7th game in a row tonight against the Thunder. I think it just has to be George, because we have no idea when Scoot's coming back. And Keyonte George has been the better player this year anyway. And I think Utah's going to keep handing him minutes. So I would go Keyonte.
Yeah, I got a nice look at him a couple of games back. The Utah Jazz were in Orlando, and he just scores with such ease. He's really an effortless type of player, a lot more lanky than I realized. And I mean that in a positive way. Like, he's a good finisher at the rim because he's got so much range to his game. Solid 3-point shooter. I think he looks like he has already grown leaps and bounds because of the minutes he's been given throughout this year. To me, it's easily Keyonte George at this point.
Free Key says, hey, just want to join the pity party. I'm down Ayton, Brunson, Okongwu, Bagley, and maybe Cam Johnson. Cam left last night's game. Condolences, man. Thoughts and prayers, whatever we could do for you. We're happy to lop as much pity on you as we can. All right, let's hit a few more and then we'll be out of here.
Let me say the real MVPs, by the way, Nick, the real MVPs of this podcast are the people that know they have no chance and are still listening to us and commenting on the feed. Yes. They're the real MVPs.
And still setting lineups every week. Like, that's the worst thing is when somebody completely gives up, and if you're in a category league or even head to head, of course, right? You're just handing free wins to somebody. It's like, do your due diligence. It's your responsibility to the league to make sure you're playing this out, even if you're in these terrible situations where you somehow have like 7 guys on IL. All right, we'll rifle through a few more. Jeffrey says, I've lost Poeltl and I need a center. Looking for a trade before our deadline. Thoughts on giving Aaron Nesmith for Wendell Carter in a 14-team 9-cat league? I think that's fair. If you could do that deal, I would do it. I like Nesmith. He has not played well lately. He played really well before he had a 5-game injury absence. But I would do that deal, especially because you specifically need a center. So even if you're pro Nesmith and you think he's going to bounce back, I think you have to prioritize your positional need here. And I would absolutely go get Wendell Carter for Nesmith. What say you?
Yeah, I would have to go back and look at the split of what his season has looked like, the consistency of it after adding Pascal Siakam, because it seems like just conventional wisdom. And I noticed this. I watch more. I watch more of the Pacers than I think if you were to like weight the teams that I follow on a night-to-night basis. For whatever reason, the Pacers are towards the top of my list. It seems like since Pascal Siakam has been added to the mix, Nesmith has kind of fallen back into the background a little bit. And I don't know for sure if the stats necessarily back that up, because Nesmith has still had some good games over the course of the last month plus. But yeah, I think Wendell Carter Jr. at this point is more reliable, and that flux that we were in with the Magic and their bigs, that has really settled down. It's Wendell Carter Jr.'s job. There's no doubt about that. And there's a clear hierarchy of bigs in Orlando where for a minute we had no idea what that rotation was looking like.
Good question here from Jay Sizzle. He says, in a 9-cat 10-team league, what order would you rank the following? Andrew Wiggins, who will return tonight, Bogdanovic, and Trey Murphy. Murphy went crazy last night and had 10 threes. So keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Those are really
I have a hard
tough
time getting away from that.
For me. I mean, Murphy's been on fire lately. And, the Pels have been mostly healthy during that span.
We love what Dean Wade gave us. How about Trey Murphy hit 4 more threes than him last night? I need more of that. I put Trey Murphy at the top of the list.
Yeah, I think I would go Murphy, Bogdanovic, Wiggins in that order. And Wiggins has played better lately. It was such a disaster early on. He's been more consistent, but still, it just doesn't look like the same guy. And he's only missed 4 games, but it was a personal absence. We saw that last year, and after he came back, wasn't the same at all. I think you're going to get more well-rounded production out of the other two. Whereas with Wiggins, it's kind of just points, lower end rebounds, like 1 or 2 assists. The defensive stats tend to come and go. He's been better with steals lately, I guess. And the 3-point shot has been relatively hot. But yeah, I would go Murphy, Bogdanovic, Wiggins. But it's pretty close. I mean, I would love to have any of those guys on my team right now, especially in a deeper league. All right, we'll do 1 or 2 more, and then we'll get out of here. Aditya says Gafford, Reath, Micic for rest of season / fantasy playoffs. We're getting to that point in the year, Brandon, where this is a pressing question.
I'm still trying to figure out how to pronounce his first name.
Yeah, well, yeah. I think it's Vasilje. That's what I've been saying, at least. We're talking the point guard in Charlotte. Micic has played really well the last couple games. I mean, he's had arguably his best game of the year, 21, 5, and 4 with 2 steals. He's been piling up steals the last few games. My answer, of course, would be depends what you need. I'm still a little skeptical on Gafford just because of the playing time prior to last night, and we'll see if maybe he turns some sort of corner as far as working his way into Jason Kidd's rotation last night. But I don't know. They have so many big men. So if you need if you need a guard, obviously you're going Micic. If you need assists or steals, Micic. I think in general, I would say the one risk with Micic is that LaMelo Ball comes back at some point, and then you're in big trouble. But who knows if that's going to happen? I have no idea. We've gotten no indication as of right now, because I think Ayton coming back is more probable than LaMelo at this point. I think I would go Micic, Gafford, Reath. I don't know. This is really tough, man. Do you feel strongly?
Well, I think this is one of those scenarios where obviously the positional need matters more than anything else. And then the second thing is if you're especially if you're setting your lineup for an entire week, how many times do these teams play in week 21? And that'll be something to look into as well. But if I'm just saying in a vacuum, if I'm just ranking these players, I think I'd rank it the way you have it listed. I really like Daniel Gafford, and I'm surprised that they haven't been using him more at this point after acquiring him at the trade deadline, but maybe they're getting to that point. So I'm sort of taking the bait on that. Reath has been piling up stats. So you kind of know what you're getting in him, and it's good. And then Micic, who knows? Because you're right. The second LaMelo Ball comes back, if that does happen, he's got no value whatsoever. The other two are going to maintain theirs for the rest of the season.
Okay, we'll do this last one real quickly. It's a good one to end on, kind of a more abstract question. Kage says, advice besides the obvious for joining a keeper league. It's my first year in fantasy this year, and I'm by far in last because of injuries, and joining a keeper next year, and I want to do what I can to be ahead. Good question. I mean, it in some ways depends on what kind of league you're entering. Is it more of a dynasty format where you have contracts? Is it a keeper league where you can keep X number of players year over year? Are you doing a draft or an auction to start this league, or are you inheriting someone else's team? If it's the latter, you're kind of at the mercy of what they did with their roster. But I mean, with a keeper league, there's one of two ways you could go, right? You're either gunning for it right away, or you're building for the future, right? And my advice to you would be to look at some mock drafts. Even ones from this year. You can try to find some early mocks for next year as well. We have keeper rankings on our site that I would push you toward as well, that we keep updated throughout the year. But it's really about choosing your lane. What I would not tell you to do is try to do both. In some keeper leagues, you could draft picks or draft rookies, out of the draft pool. I wouldn't go too heavy on those if you want to win next year. Someone in a keeper league, someone like LeBron or Kevin Durant or Stephen Curry, those guys are going to fall a little bit. You're going to see younger players pushed up the board. So in my opinion, it's relatively easy to build, not like, the number one team, but to build a competitive team right away if you want, because a lot of other people, kind of get you know, and it's a strategy. I wouldn't say they get lost in this, but a lot of people, you know, really get the keeper mindset of like, well, this guy's 30. I don't want to take him.
Right.
There's going to be a lot of like, you know, DeRozan, Siakam types that you can load up on a little bit later in drafts and put together a really good team right away if you want to.
And there are enough really good in terms of building your roster at the top. There are enough superstar level players that are still at the beginning of or in the middle of their prime to where you don't need to really worry about that with the top players that are on your roster. So you should be good in terms of your top tier player that you're going to roll over year. What you don't want to do is get overly excited about rookies or second year players just because you're in a keeper league. The entire mission of being in a fantasy league is to win it. Any given year you get the opportunity, and the first year of a keeper league is still that. You're still trying to win.
Yeah.
Outside of you said outside of the obvious, so I'm actually going to go off of the beaten path of just how to build a roster. Make sure you're in a league with committed fantasy managers that aren't going to bow out in a year or two. I think that's the key to building any successful keeper or dynasty league is you got to get in with people that you know are going to be committed year over year. We hear this all the time in every sport. I'm going to keep my keeper league fell apart. I'm starting up a new one. That takes all the joy out of it if you're constantly starting a new keeper league. So find the right people and then don't obsess over rookies.
All right, great stuff as always today, Brandon. Great questions in the chat, guys. We appreciate you. We'll keep doing these pods through the rest of the regular season and into the playoffs. 5 days a week. So tomorrow you could catch Dr. Ray and Rick Kambla on the pod. Friday we'll have the waiver wire episode coming with Alex Barutha, Ken Kreitz, and Shannon McEwen. Check out Brandon's picks videos on the RotoWire Twitter account. Go play on PrizePicks, and please like, subscribe, check out our channel. Helps us out immensely as we try to build this thing out. And check out rotowire.com/picks. If you're playing on a pick site or you're just playing player props, we got great intel, an awesome tool over there, rotowire.com/picks. Brandon, good stuff, man. We'll talk soon.